All right, gang, we are now going to work on lesson 1.3a using midpoint formulas. So to start out here, our goal is going to be to find the midpoint of a segment, and the midpoint is the middle. First, we're going to learn out what that is, and then we're going to figure out how to find it. The first thing that I want to do, this is not actually in your notes, is I just want to show you a little something. And it's a paper folding activity. So the first thing that I want you to do on a piece of paper, if you want to try this, is draw segment AB on a piece of paper. We're down right here. Draw segment AB on a piece of paper. And so if we do that, it would look something like that. And then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to fold the paper so that B is on top of A. That's the second thing that we're going to do. So we're just going to be folding it in half. So it's going to be looking like that. Notice that it's kind of diagonal down because I drew my line a little bit sideways. And then the last thing that we're going to do, it asks us to label point M and compare AM, MB, and AB. So when I unfold it, and I have that point M in the middle, think about where it is. And it turns out, because you folded it in half, that these two segments really should be equal to each other. Because this guy right here is halfway in between A and B. And that leads us right into our new vocabulary. And the first word that we're going to talk about is midpoint. The midpoint is the point that divides a segment into two equal parts. That is like that point M on the top there that we just talked about. Bisector, a little bit different. The bisector is the thing that cuts an object into two equal parts. So it is the thing that goes through the middle, and that thing does not actually always have to be a point. And then the last term that we have here is segment bisector, and that is specifically talking about segments. A segment bisector is the thing that cuts a segment into two equal parts. We will learn later that you can cut angles into two parts. I mean, anything that is a figure you can really cut into two parts. So in this lesson, we're specifically talking about a segment bisector. The last thing that I want to talk about is how many different things can be a bisector. So for example, I have my segment AB here. What can I cut that in half with? Well, I could put a point in the middle to make two equal parts. But what else could I put through the middle to make two equal parts? Let me give you one more quick example, and then I'll have you think of some on your own. I could also draw a line through the middle that would cut it into two equal parts. What I'd like you to do now is just pause for just a quick second and see how many other things you can think of that might cut that into two equal parts, and then I'll get back to you. We'll see how many of ours match. All right. The question is now, how many things did you come up with? And this is what I got. I added three more here, if you can kind of see what we got here. The first one that I did was I I just put a segment through that other segment, so I had a segment bisecting a segment. Another thing that I did was I drew a ray, and notice it goes right through this middle point right here, and I have 2 equal parts there. The other thing that I drew, this one was a little bit trickier, was I drew a plane that went through that, and it broke segment AB into 2 equal parts. So there are all kinds of different things that can be a bisector of AB. Know that anything can cut something else in half. All right, we're going to pause this, and I'm going to jump ahead to page 2, and we're going to talk about the last vocabulary word for this lesson, midpoint formula. All right, the last thing we're going to talk about here is the midpoint formula, and we're going to start out with these segments that we have at the top of the page here. Notice I have a number line. It goes from -5 to +5, and I have these segments up here. Over on the side, it says that they would like us to put these segments anywhere on the number line and find the midpoint of them. So the first one here, if I take this first segment and put it, all right, now that we're on page 2, we are going to talk about the midpoint formula. Before we do that, we're going to look at this number line here. I have these 2 segments up here, a blue one and a red one, and we are going to find the middle of those 2 segments. So we're going to follow these directions that I have over on the side here. And the directions say, put the segments anywhere on the number line and find the midpoint. So when we do this, we can put them wherever we want. It doesn't change the length of them, from -4 to 0, from -2 to 2, from 1 to 5, whatever it might be. So if I put that right there from 1 to 5, I can give some coordinate names for that. I can say that A is at 1 and B is at 5. So I could say that AB is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. 5 minus 1 is 4. And then I would count to find my midpoint. And the midpoint, because it's half of 4 is 2, the midpoint would fall right there. And so the real question is, how do I get from 1 to 5 and then find out that 3 is the midpoint? Think about that. What could that be? Let's look at the other segment, the red one, and I'm going to put that guy on there. And again, we can put that wherever we want. I'm going to put it over here from -5 to 0. And again, I could call that C, and I could call that D. And I know that CD is 5 spaces, even though it's on the negative side, it's still just 5 spaces. And where would the midpoint fall? Well, if I took that 5 and divided it by 2, I would get 2.5. So I know if I counted in 2.5 spaces in either direction, I would come up with a midpoint right here at 2.5. And again, the question is, how do we get from 0 to -5 to the midpoint of -2.5? And it turns out that the midpoint is actually just the average of the endpoints. And think about that. How do you find the average of something? Well, that's where you take the 2 numbers and you add them together, and then you divide by how many numbers you have. And in this case, we only have 2 of them, endpoints, one on the left, one on the right. And that will equal the midpoint. That right there? Know this for the test. You have to be able to find the midpoint between 2 values. And then with that being said, we're going to go down here and we're going to look at this graph, because like we had that problem on the last page, we had a diagonal line. Now it turns out that really we still just have 2 endpoints. Here is A and here is B, and we need to find the midpoint between the 2. What we really need to do is find the average of the x's and the average of the y's. And it turns out all you have to do is take the two x numbers and divide by 2. Those two x numbers are the first numbers right here. And then you will take the two y numbers and divide those by 2. And the two y numbers are these guys right here. So your midpoint formula is simply x plus x divided by 2 and y plus y divided by 2. It's just a matter of doing the midpoint formula twice. So pay attention to that, and that also is something that you want to make sure that you can do. Average of the x and average of the y. Two little problems all built into one. What I want you to do now is pause your video, give these problems a try, your practice problems, and then I will come back and work through some of those if you need some help.